Namaste. I am Gloria Grace Rand, and I am delighted to be with you again and to have a guest with us on the show. Always one of my favorite things is when I get to interview interesting people, and today's guest is one of those fascinating people who has a lot to offer our world right now. And I'm going to tell you a bit more about him in a moment, but I want to first welcome Dr. Sunil Raheja.
That's right. You got it right there, Gloria. Thank
There we
you.
go.
It's always wonderful to be here with you. That's wonderful.
Yes, I wanted to make sure that I pronounced his name right, and then I was like stumbling anyway, but we got it. So I'm so glad you're here today. So let me share with our listeners just what you do in the world. So he is the author of the book Dancing with Wisdom, a sacred quest to restore meaning, purpose, and fun to your life and work, which definitely sounds like something we all need to be able to make sure that we do, because otherwise, what is the point, right? I think. He's also a psychiatrist, a blogger, a podcaster of his own, and a coach. And he says it's a privilege to work with senior leaders who feel stuck, empowering them to re-engage with deeper purpose and live life in crescendo so their best days are still to come. So are you a little musician there with that crescendo reference there?
Actually, I'm not a musician.
Just
No, I'm
struck
not a
me there.
musician at all. But I think it's certainly this understanding that, yeah, living with our best years ahead of us. I think particularly as we get older, there's a tendency to talk about the good old days, which I don't really believe ever existed. And to think that, as we get older, that it's just going to be downhill. But I believe that if we have the right understanding, the right perspective, actually the best is yet to come.
Yes. Well, I'm certainly counting on that because, and actually, I believe that's true because I really do feel like every decade that I've gone through has been better even than the one before. So far, so good. So I'm getting ready to enter my sixth decade, I guess, if you're in your 60s, or is it your seventh? I forget, but whatever, how that works math wise. But anyway, I'm going to be 60 soon. So I'm looking forward to my 60s being even better than my 50s were.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So I usually do like to start off the podcast by asking our guests to tell us a little bit about your journey. What got you maybe even interested in psychiatry, and how you even then have become an author. So.
Wow, it's a long journey. I think for me, I mean, I came as a best place to start, probably start at the beginning, really, in the sense that I came as an immigrant child from India to the UK, and very much, I think one of the when you look back in your life, you think about the themes and patterns that have repeated themselves, and one of those themes and patterns is always feeling like an outsider. So coming as an immigrant child from India, I actually came speaking Hindi, and the sort of perceived wisdom at that time was only speak to your child in one language or they'll become confused. So although I came speaking Hindi, I quickly forgot that I only spoke English. And growing up, going to school and mixing with my peers, I was often told, this isn't your country, your true home is in India. And so I had this sort of sense that actually, no, I belong over there. And this is at a time which is hard to imagine now, but it was a time before the internet and before the connections that we have, that technology gives us.
Right.
And so I grew. So I had no real connection with India. You couldn't make phone calls. If you wanted to write a letter, it would take 2 weeks for you to, take a week for the letter to get there, a week for it to come back. So there was no real communication. But when I eventually got to India, I was only about 8 years old. I realized actually, well, all my relatives told me that actually you're English, you're not Indian either, and I couldn't speak the language. And so, a theme that's followed me all my life is this sense of being an outsider. I got, you mentioned about being a psychiatrist. So I trained to become a doctor. But again, it's funny. I entered into medical school not sure what I wanted to do with my life. And I was very good at mathematics and physics and subjects like that. But, again, in a naive 18, 19-year-old, I thought, well, what's the point of any of those subjects? Because, you end up working for the defense industry and you create nuclear bombs and things like that. And the only career I could think of that was actually genuinely helping people was medicine. So that's why I did medicine. But to be quite frank with you, Gloria, I was totally unsuited for it because um, I was very left brain, as I understand now, very good at problem solving in terms of, I would have done better in maths or engineering, something like that. But medicine's completely different. It's understanding the systems of the body, it's understanding, the anatomy, the physiology, the biochemistry, the pathology, very descriptive subjects. And I
Mm.
really struggled. I struggled really big time. I think it's a miracle of God that I even got through. I had a spiritual awakening when I was at medical school. That stayed with me to this very day. Um, but again, it's a sense of feeling an outsider, and I think I found my niche in psychiatry because psychiatry is very much about not treating people as machines, but
Mm.
treating them as people who have worries and fears and interact within their families, with wider society. So that's always fascinated me.
Mm.
We need people who are um, who do internal medicine, who are surgeons. We need those people, but that just wasn't me.
Mm.
And so I found my niche in psychiatry. But then as time has gone on, I've also become very fascinated by the whole area of positive psychology. And that's really about why is it that some people, if you take two groups of people who go through similar circumstances, why is it some thrive and others, as it were, flounder? What's the difference between them? And the skills that you need to do well in life are very different to, as it were, to just dealing with illness.
Mm.
Health is not the opposite of illness. It's qualitatively very different. And that interest has grown. And that's particularly one of the reasons why I've gone into coaching as well. So I work as a psychiatrist, but primarily as a coach, but using my psychiatry background to inform that as well.
Mm. Yeah, and I can see how they could be very complementary to one another. So that makes sense. And yeah, I sympathize with your struggle. And yeah, I was like, that must have been so frustrating as a child. And here you're struggling to get along in the UK. Then you go to India, and then they're like, well, no, you're still not. We're still, you're English now.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh my goodness.
I think one of the things you begin to realize as well is that you have these struggles. And then as you get older, you begin to realize everybody has their own struggles. And, it's very difficult to comment on somebody else's struggles. It might not look too big deal to you, but to them it's big. It's a bit
Mm.
like major surgery and minor surgery. There is major surgery. Have a coronary artery bypass, or
Mhm.
have a liver transplant. That's major surgery. And there's minor surgery in terms of have a blood test or have a um, you know have a hernia removed. It's relatively minor. But if it's your body, it's all major surgery.
That's true.
If it's happening to you. So I think it's we all have our own sets of challenges and struggles, and because we all have different backgrounds and experiences, it's very yeah, we need to just, as it were, treat each other with respect and accepting that we've got different challenges to go through. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. And one of the things I know you talk about is that our world has certainly changed over the last
Yes.
50 years. And you mentioned at the beginning, I mean, that when you grew up, there was no internet, and that it took, so long to be able to get letters. And I remember that it was so you could to call long distance, oh my gosh, it cost a fortune. And so you couldn't stay on the phone long if you were talking to somebody, in another part of the country or something like that. And now that's something that we just take for granted that we can. I mean, I'm talking to you right now over Zoom. I live in the United States and you're in the UK, and yet we're able to do this. Um, so, has there been a cost though to our lives? With all of this. I mean, even though it's great, technology has been, you know, brought a lot of things good into our world. But has there been a cost to it as well?
Well, yes, I always think of Charles Dickens says in his book A Tale of Two Cities, he says it was the best of times and it was the worst of times.
Mm.
And I think technology has done amazing things. I remember when we came from India, my mum would write letters to her sisters and to her parents back in India, and it would take a week for the letter to get there. And if the person at the other end replied immediately, it would take a week back. And you're right, making a phone call would cost a fortune. And now, as you said, here we are just interacting across the ocean, and it's obviously apart from the electricity and the software cost is it's free. It's practically free, which is
Mhm.
amazing. But the thing is, the baseline has risen,
Mm.
so we don't think anything of it. It's now become commonplace. It's become ordinary.
Mhm.
And so there is something, I think, about realizing, just in the sense of how privileged we are. And I'm very fascinated with this whole subject of wisdom. And I think part of wisdom is grasping the good things that we have, and the ways that we have been blessed, and what we do have, because particularly in a world that's becoming increasingly cynical, confusing, complex, chaotic. Um, because I think if we don't live with wisdom, what happens is that it produces a kind of noise, and
Mm.
that's leading to higher rates of mental illness, unhappiness, frustration. When in many ways it doesn't have to be that way at all. We can look at things in a different way. We can have a different mindset, a different attitude. We can realize the privileges that we've been given. I've got a very, I've got a personal faith, a relationship with Jesus, and my faith in Christ, in the sense, very much grounds me, because it's my my security is not in what I do, but in what He's done for me.
Mm.
And I think that's, otherwise it's very easy to lose perspective.
Mm. What would you what would you say to someone though who is um maybe still is sort of struggling with but the way things are these days, things have, as you say, we've gotten so cynical, and it's good that I recognize that you've got faith in a higher power, that keeps you grounded, and I know I believe in God as well, but um, how do you help someone who maybe either for some reason maybe they don't have that type of faith, or what do you do to help them um, to be able to manage, I guess, to be able to thrive in today's world?
Yes. Well, in the book, I talk about the four vital questions of life, and they are: being, who am I called to be? Relating, how do I relate to others? Doing, what am I called to do that no one else can do? And ultimately, leaving. And that's the big question of leaving the world, but also leaving in terms of transitions, changing job, leaving a relationship, all these kind of things. Um, and I think wisdom has answers to those deep questions. They're questions that are at the back of our mind. We don't ask them directly as that, but we
Mm,
do. But we're often asking ourselves in one form or another, who am I, in terms of what are my values, what really matters to me, um, what, yeah, who am I, and then relationships. We have so many relationships come and go. Who other people I'm committed to? Who other people are committed to me? How do I relate in this global village that we're a part of? We connect so easily. How do I manage my relationships? Then, as I said, and then the doing part. Again, we've got a world with got an abundance of choices, and how we spend our time, what we can do. How do I sort of sift through all that and decide which of the things are most important to me? But you talked about a person who doesn't have a faith. I think ultimately, the question is, what am I living for? And Stephen Covey talks about four great needs of to live, to love, to learn, and to leave a legacy. And I like the sense that all of us want to know that our lives matter
mm,
at the end of the day, that we weren't just here and then gone. Um, and I think you need to have an internal perspective. Again, our secular world, is, in a sense, is very much focused on this life and everything in this life. And I think the danger with that is that and I think we're seeing that in society. It breeds a sense of meaninglessness about anything. Well, if this life is all there is, let me just get the most out of it. Let me do that in a way that doesn't care about anybody else, that just pleases me. Because what's it? Eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow we die. But I think that's quite a tragic way to live, really. Um, Ultimately, life cannot make sense, I don't think, without an infinite reference point. And I think it's important that we explore that for ourselves and
yeah.
ask those questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Because this notion that we are so separate is just really, I think, at the core of so many of our problems, because I think if we could really appreciate that we underneath we're all the same. I mean, we're all human beings, and I believe we're all created, by whatever you want to call it, but I call it God. That then that means that we are all connected, and this notion that we're separate is just,
Yes.
you know, ludicrous, and it's why we have so many problems. But if we were appreciating that we are connected, then we would take better care of one another, and we'd take better care of our planet for sure. Um,
Yes.
let's talk.
And also that I think that we have longings as well is the other thing I would really say, is that we have deep
Mm,
longings that nothing in this life ultimately fulfills. If you could tell our grandparents or great grandparents the way that we live now, the
mm,
things that we've got, the opportunities that we've got, I mean, they would be just amazed, and they would say something along the lines of, you must live in heaven compared to what you can do, and
yeah.
yet we know it's far from heaven where we are, um, because we're still underneath the same people with the same struggles, with the same insecurities, with the same self-doubt, all these things. Um, yeah, because technology doesn't solve those problems. It just in a sense extenuates them. It makes them. It just magnifies them. Yeah.
Mm, yeah. Um, I ask you a question. What is your definition of wisdom? Because you say your book is called Dancing with Wisdom. So how do you define wisdom?
Yeah, so it's such a rich subject.
Mm,
I sort of think of it, if you think of it, the facets of a diamond, because you can look at it from so many different angles. Um, but just giving some simple phrases of doing it, it's the best means to the best ends,
mm,
or um, timeless truths that connect me to the best version of who I am and who I long to be. Uh, Ultimately, wisdom is capability in the complexities of life where the rules don't help. In the Old Testament there are two proverbs next to each other. One says, "Answer a fool according to his folly, or he'll be wise in his own eyes." And the very next proverb says, "Don't answer a fool according to his folly, or you'll be like him." So you're in a meeting, somebody says something which you think is outrageous. That very first proverb says, "Tell that person it's outrageous," and the very next one says, "Don't say anything, keep quiet." And the point is, you need wisdom to know which is right, because it's going to depend on what the subject is, it's going to depend on the context, it's going to depend on how well you know the person, it depends on who else is there in the room. There's so many variables that there is no textbook answer.
mm,
So that's why wisdom in a sense is capability in the complexities of life where the rules don't help. But it's also much more than that, because we come to wisdom because we come across a problem which we don't quite know how to solve. We feel we reach the end of our resources. But I think the more we explore wisdom, and the deeper we go, and this is why I sort of talk about it like a diamond, is we find it's richer and richer, because it brings us to the very core of our being. Because ultimately, it's seeing that life doesn't make sense, as I said earlier on, without this infinite reference point. And as someone who has a relationship with Christ, I learned that ultimately Jesus Christ, he is my wisdom. And a relationship with him actually brings me wisdom. So it's not about getting more and more information or more knowledge, but it's knowing him and having a relationship with him that I can actually grow in that wisdom. But that's the full journey.
mhm.
Before we get there, uh, we keep, as it were, bumping into reality and finding that we don't have the resources to deal with the challenges that are in front of us, and so we realize that actually we need outside help.
Yeah. Yeah, because that is the ultimate challenge of it, is because, as you say, wisdom and knowledge are definitely not the same thing, and I think maybe, I don't know if I've heard maybe said it's sometimes like applied knowledge, but but
Yes, or experience. Yeah, that's right.
yeah,
Knowledge plus experience is that's the other thing. Knowledge plus experience is wisdom,
yeah.
and that's in a very practical sense. Um, yeah, that. But then I think it gets bigger and bigger in terms of, because the purpose of wisdom, again, you bring in another Hebrew word, is the word shalom, which is this sort of multidimensional thriving. And
Mm.
so it's whole, and one of the best definitions of shalom that I've ever come across is wholeness for the whole person, for the whole of life, extending to the whole of the cosmos. And you
Mm.
can't really get more encompassing and comprehensive than that.
That's true.
That's ultimately the purpose of wisdom,
Mm.
to connect us with our Creator and to understand how I fit in this world, because we are so restless. You
Yeah.
know, we question, what am I here? What am I doing? Am I making the most of my life? We have that phrase FOMO, fear of missing out.
Mm.
Um, we have books like 100 Things to Do Before You Die. There's this inner restlessness trying to, yeah, trying to make sense of it all.
Right.
Yeah,
I'm thinking, that they say you get, with age comes wisdom, but
so
not always. But I think it does help, because I think
it
it is.
can help if you're open to it. I mean, I'd say,
Yeah.
there's a world of difference between 30 years of experience and 1 year of experience repeated 30 times.
Mm.
If you don't learn from it, then you're destined to keep on making the same mistakes. We
Right.
talk about this, I think, psychologists talk about this in terms of locus of control. If I have an internal locus of control or an external locus of control, an internal locus of control is very much saying, okay, what am I responsible for? I focus on that. But if I've got an external locus of control, I blame the government, I blame the economy, I
Mm.
blame my spouse, I blame my boss. I'm always looking to, which ultimately is foolishness, really. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. Well, so how does one acquire wisdom?
Wow, great question. I think wisdom, in a sense, it comes from it comes from foolishness, and it's recognizing how foolish you've been at times.
Mm.
Um, there is a proverb, it says in the Old Testament again, it says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." And I think it's not fear in the sense of being terrified, but it's fear in the sense of a healthy respect and reverence for God and for life and for the life that He's given me and for what He's given me and what He hasn't given me.
Mm.
And also ultimately realizing that actually there is a God and I'm not Him. I'm not ultimately the one who's in charge. He's the one in charge. And I, I realized that not with a sense of bitterness or anger, but with a sense of, okay, I don't have all the answers. I don't have all the wisdom. I don't know. And I need to trust that He does and that He is ultimately guiding and leading my life.
Mm.
And as I trust in Him, and the best definition I came across of fear of the Lord is it's the deep trembling joy and wonder that increases as I relate to God as He actually is,
Mm.
not as I imagine Him to be. So, when we have a relationship with somebody, say we're married, I mean, I've been married for how long? Goodness, a long time, about 32, yeah, I'll be 32 years actually this this month. And the image I had of my wife when we got married 32 years ago and the person I know now are very different people. Of course, we've changed over those 32 years,
Sure.
but the person I know, before I had sort of fantasy in my head as to what she was like. And now I know the real person. The real person is much more interesting, much more
Mm.
delightful, much more real, as it
Mm.
were, than the picture I had in my head. And I think this is the same with God. We like to imagine Him in certain ways. We think that He needs to do what I want to do, and then we get frustrated and angry because life doesn't go the way that we expect or the way that we want. And I think wisdom is grasping that and holding that. And so ultimately, it's about that deepening relationship with God through Christ that Jesus gives us.
Mm.
Because one of the first things about wisdom as well is realizing I don't have the answers, I don't have the ability, the capability, I don't have the resources, and that there is this big gap between God and me, through my own sinfulness, through my own um, my own weaknesses, through my own negligence, but He's made a way for me to come to Him through Christ,
Mm.
and that way I can grow in wisdom.
Mm. Yeah, and I know one of the things that I talk about in my book and when I work with clients is the importance of letting go and letting God into your
Mm.
life and really, and realizing that, yeah, you don't have all the answers. And because in the past want all the answers. I want, and and I've wanted to be like fixed now, and I've come to
Yeah.
realize that that life is a journey, and there's always going to be
Yes.
something that's going to come up, but to
Sure.
just let to trust and God, that God will provide the answers, and
Yeah.
and
And,
so
and and I suppose you need the wisdom to know, when do I let go and let God, and when do I actually move forward positively, almost aggressively. To it's having that wisdom. So sometimes
Mhm.
we hold back, sometimes we move forward.
Yeah.
Uh,
Um, what's a commonly held belief that you disagree with? That maybe is about, maybe about wisdom even.
Commonly held belief about wisdom that I disagree with. Well, actually, I talk about that in one of the chapters of my book. About I say, in terms of developing wisdom, there are three main things really. It's managing your ego,
Mm.
removing your idols, and challenging your assumptions. And
Mm.
one of the common, I think, beliefs that we have about wisdom is that if I live with wisdom, then everything will go smoothly for me. I won't have problems. I'll somehow just coast through life, with a sort of Zen-like peace. Uh, and any problems and difficulties, they will, they won't disturb me, and I'll have this serenity and happiness and cheerfulness right through it. Well, unfortunately, that's not the case. You know, Again, I
Darn.
think, yeah, darn, yeah, I just I wish it was the case. But again, if you look at Jesus, you look at his life.
Yeah.
I don't think you could agree that anybody lived a wiser life, and yet he caused, eh, his life, caused a lot of negative reaction as well. He did an
Mm.
amazing amount of good, but he upset a lot of people as well, particularly religious people. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right. So I think that's probably one of the biggest assumptions. I think that if I walk, even dance with wisdom, as my book is
Mhm.
called, that somehow or other I'll be, as it were, inoculated. I'll be impervious to the vicissitudes, the problems, the difficulties of life. There's
Mm.
no guarantees, but I think what the guarantee is that God will be there to hold us and to guide us and to strengthen us. And He will provide a pathway through that. I think
Mm.
that beginning. And I think ultimately that one day it will make sense.
Mm.
It may not make sense in this life, but one day it will.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, what are you curious about right now?
Wow, let's go some good questions. What am I curious about right now? I'm curious about how to, so on a personal level, is how do I integrate my fascination with wisdom, with my coaching, with helping more people, and how do I do that in a way that's sustainable and
Mm.
that, because the more as it were, the more you do, the more complicated your life can become. So how do I keep, as it were, a degree of simplicity, keeping the most important thing the most important, keeping the main thing
Mhm.
the main thing,
Right.
amidst all the other things that are happening as well. I think that's one of the things that I think, particularly in our world, which is so frenetic and so busy, is how do I slow down to
Mm.
deal with the complexity out there. That's probably one. I'm always, and I'm always curious about, what is God trying to teach me? What's He trying to say to me? And I love learning anyway. So I I love reading and finding out about subjects and going on courses and things like that. So that never finishes. Yeah.
Mm.
I'm curious about people. I think, in a sense, that's one of the things I think, being a psychiatrist and a coach,
Yeah.
is that people are endlessly fascinating,
Mhm.
um, and just so different. Um, and yeah, and finding out about more about them, finding out ways maybe that I can help them and support them. Those are
Mhm.
things that I'm curious about.
Yeah. Um, and it just occurred to me because I mentioned in your bio that you're a podcaster. So do
Mm.
you interview people on your podcast as well?
Yes, yes, no, I
Yeah.
do, yeah. So, yeah, it's called one. Surprise, surprise, it's called the Dancing with Wisdom podcast. It was called the Making Sense of Life podcast, actually, which is, again, is maybe a good definition of wisdom as well, making sense of life.
Mm.
And yeah, I've been doing it for a few years, usually only about once a month.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, again, book authors, interesting people who've done interesting things.
Mhm.
Yeah, very similar to you, I think. Gloria as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, 'cause that's what I was thinking. Because I know I enjoy meeting new people and learning about them, and like you, I love to learn and love to read, and I'm always finding, uh, especially, like, reading new spiritual books and getting different perspectives on how to live life and how to really, um, you know, create a life that is worth living now, and to create a legacy as well. Because I think that is something that as we get older, we start thinking about more and more. And,
Yeah.
how do we want to be remembered when we're not
Yeah.
living on this life anymore? Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. Is there anything else that I didn't ask you about that you think would be worthwhile for our audience to know about wisdom or handling life right now?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in the book, what I'm really talking about, there are three questions I think that really that are really sort of um, fascinating me, continue to fascinate me, and I'm continue to be curious about. The first is, why is it some people in that can really thrive in life? Why do we, have people like I don't know, a Steve Jobs or an Elon Musk or somebody like that, who
Mhm.
or a Bill Gates, who see a situation and can really develop it. You know, um, Again, I think Jesus talks about that in terms of a harvest 10, 20, 100 times what was sown. Why can some people be so incredibly productive?
Mm,
But then there's a remnant of those people who are not just productive, but they're able to, as it were, develop in their character as well and their relationships. They're able to bring those along with them. So
mm,
so often what we see is that success in one area comes at a cost in another area.
mm.
So what is it that means that some people can actually, as it were, keep everything together?
Yeah.
Keep their relationships intact, keep their health intact, keep their own godliness intact and character. And how do such people think and behave that's different from the rest of us?
Mm,
Those are the things that really fascinate me. And in many, many ways, that's what the book is an exploration of. It's about creating a case for saying, um, you think, you need a new job, you need a new relationship, you need more money, and that may be valid, but actually what you actually need is wisdom. And that's what you need to hunger and thirst for.
mm,
And so I created a case for desiring wisdom. And the book was really written in the context as well. A theme that runs through it was I had a good friend of mine who died at the age of 32 quite suddenly back
mm,
in 2014.
mm,
And his sudden death really, really rocked my world and made me really think, what am I living for? What really matters to me? And that's a theme that goes through the book. And so this issue about desiring wisdom, wisdom for the heart, the emotional, wisdom for the mind, the intellectual, and wisdom for life. And in that chapter, I talk very much about the world we live in and the problems. Talking as a psychiatrist,
mhm.
depression, anxiety,
Right.
suicide, stress, burnout, loneliness. These problems that we have because we lack wisdom, and then developing wisdom, managing your ego, removing your idols, challenging your assumptions, and then deepening in wisdom. And there's a whole chapter on defining wisdom with divine. Um, those four vital questions I talked about: for being, relating, doing, and leaving. Then your wisdom quest, and then your next best step.
Mm,
Um, that's in a sense a synopsis of where the book goes to help us ultimately dance with wisdom. Because again, that's living life to the full with a jest and energy, joyfulness, and a delight, really, which I think which we all hunger and yearn for.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, it sounds wonderful, and I wish I had a chance to read it beforehand, but I'm definitely going to get it now so I can make sure I can read it and learn about how to dance with wisdom. And I know that our listeners out there probably would love to be able to get a copy of it as well. So
Yeah. So
how can people get it and also get connected with you?
thank you. Yes. Well, it's available on Amazon. It's in Kindle. The audiobook is on Audible is there as well.
Mm,
Um, you can get it with me at drsunil.com. That's drsunil.com. Yeah, those are probably the best
okay.
places to
All
connect with
right,
me. Yeah.
excellent. Well, I'll be sure and have all of that information in the show notes. So thank you so much for spending some time with us today, and I really appreciate you.
No, it's a pleasure. And just say there is a companion guide you can get from the website. I should have said. It's just if you go to drsunil.com
Oh,
slash workbook, there's a complimentary workbook that you can get that sort of goes to the book, and it's standalone as well. Because I think when I wrote the book, I wrote it in a sense to be as open and transparent about my own challenges, but then it gives the reader permission to think about their own life and what it means for them to dance with wisdom.
Oh, excellent. All right. Well, I'll make sure I have that in the show notes as well then. So to let people get their hands on that workbook. So that's excellent. So thank you again for being with us. I
Well,
really
thank you, Gloria.
appreciate it.
It's a real privilege to join you. Thank you so much for this
Yeah.
opportunity.
And I want to thank all of you out there for listening and for watching. And I've got a cat trying to climb up on my lap at the moment, uh, but he's not going to disturb us. Um, and so if you did get some value out of today's episode, oh, there he is on my lap now. I hope that you will share it with a friend and make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast and also on my YouTube channel at Gloria Grace Rand. And until next time, as always, I encourage you to go out and live fully, love deeply, and engage authentically.